Hi everyone, I'm Heather Wen, a retired nurse practitioner and the founder and practitioner at Arizona Healing Alternatives. On this channel, you'll find several videos, what I like to call aha moments, where we'll be discussing issues that impact your health. So whether you decide to use Western medicine, alternative medicine, or even a mix of both, I'm passionate about you knowing what your options are. For today's aha moment, we're going to be talking about what do you know about the word no? And what does that mean to you? We're going to be talking a lot about, for me, no is in relationship to boundaries that you have. So we'll talk about, well, what are boundaries and why do we even need them? We'll also talk about society and pressures when it comes to saying no and boundaries and things like that. And we're going to go into some more serious topics. So it's really important in this video, we're going to be discussing some difficult subjects. So as I've always said, you know, that my videos aren't for kids, but it's really important. But some of these subjects may be a little traumatizing to people who have been through abuse, who've been through sexual assault, or have been through rape, this sort of thing. So I want that up front, that this might be a little bit disturbing for those viewers. So please watch with caution with this, because we are going to be touching on some of those subjects in hopes to enlighten people so that they can know the importance of that word no. So let's talk about this word no, and let's talk about boundaries in general. Well, what are boundaries? Well, they can be very personal boundaries when it comes down to the boundaries of when you feel a certain way or have a certain belief system, or you are dealing with other people. It's about you having your boundaries instead of letting people kind of trounce on your boundaries. Okay, well, what does all that stuff mean? What that means is, if you think about it, there are some people who everybody, you know, when they approach that person never says no. Yes, I'll do that. Yes, I'll do that. Yes, I'll be okay with that. Yes, I'll do this. Yes, I'll do that. So that's just kind of the basic stuff. Boundaries can be, let's say, you may have boundaries about how often you're in contact with somebody. You may have boundaries about certain belief systems in your professional life, in your personal life, whatever those are. There's no right or wrong, whether you live with boundaries or without boundaries. What happens is you have to know yourself well enough to know, well, what are my boundaries? And so why is it important for us to respect these boundaries and stuff? Well, let's just go to the most basic stuff, not the more traumatic stuff, but more the most basic stuff. Is if we don't have boundaries and we continue to say yes when we mean no, first of all, hopefully people on the other end of that are more sensitive and know when they're pushing you. I mean, one of the most important examples of that, really more funny, is kids. Kids, that's their job. That's the difference. Kids, it is totally their job to push the boundaries. That's what being a kid is. So what's hard is when parents are sitting there, and if you do have children, and parents are sitting there, and the child is asking the question, and you say no. Pushes, but to the point you're just like, okay, whatever, yes, okay. So it's sort of a built-in thing. For a human being, it's a completely built-in thing, because we want what we want when we want it. It's the human condition. It totally is. And so whatever way you parent, that's a personal issue, whatever way you parent. But it's funny that even as adults, you would think, okay, well, that's a kid does that. Well, we know, because the child is learning the boundaries. Well, if a child grows up in a house that doesn't have boundaries, then that's a parenting choice. I'm not going to judge someone's parenting choice, but it makes it difficult out in the world, because are they going to get a job where they're always going to hear yes? I mean, it's interesting, because we talked about some other psychological issues and things in my love series. It's fascinating to see, you know, if somebody grows up thinking that no one ever says no to them, I think you're doing that person a disservice. I really do. But regardless of that, it's funny, because that's just sort of part of that as part of the parenting thing. But when we get to be adults, we need to act like adults. And we know that in Erickson's stages of reasoning, like I've talked in other videos, that most adults don't make it to that critical thinking, taking responsibility, adult reasoning phase. Unfortunately, a lot of adults don't get there. Ask yourself that question. Are you the type of person who spends most of their time saying yes to everything? Everybody has a request, everybody says this, and you're saying yes to absolutely everybody. And this can even be, it's hard even in family members. With family members specifically, I help people in my practice with that because, and even if they're not family members, it can be friends, things like that, where the person is just so overloaded because they keep saying yes and yes and yes and yes and yes all the time and not having any boundaries. And we see it, and when I saw it in other realms, I saw very serious cases of this when it came down to when I was a nurse practitioner, a women's healthcare nurse practitioner, and people not saying no to the wrong people in their lives or not saying no to intimate activity that was putting them at risk, this sort of thing. And that is where it can get very dangerous. But on the most subtle level, it's interesting. One way to spot whether your boundaries have been kind of trounced on is if all of a sudden you're feeling anger. Now, this is something my spiritual teacher, Dr. Judith Larkin-Reno, taught me, which was very helpful, is anger is a boundary infraction. So let's think about that. So let's say you're saying yes and yes and yes and yes to everybody. Then you're getting angry. Well, the thing is we have to ask, what are you angry about? Because if you're angry because somebody asked you to do something and you know it's way out of bounds, and it's really not something that you want to be doing, then the anger sometimes is at yourself because you're angry with yourself because you said yes. Then you're angry with them because they asked. So we have to kind of fix that a bit. So what happens with that is it's really important to know how you feel and to be able to say no. So that's one part of it. The first part of it is being able to know what your boundaries are, what you're not okay with, what you say no to, not overloading yourself. So that's on your personal level with that. The second thing is to educate those around you, and that's where the societal pressure and all that stuff comes in. So with society in general, they pressure, especially women are more in that role where we're supposed to say yes to everybody and please everybody and take care of everybody in the collective and the group and all that stuff. Well, there are men that do that too, so we don't want to go completely with the generalities. But when it like, oh, please come and help me with this and that and this and that, and guys do that too and get overloaded. So let's talk about society with that word no. This is what I find really interesting when I talk to people. When we think about society, when we look at the TV, when we look at even going back in time, one of the things that happens is many times, and I know this example for myself, but let me give you a general example and then I'll give you my own personal example. A general example would be you're out eating in a restaurant with a group of friends and you've decided you don't want to have the dessert because, I don't know, maybe you're watching your waistline, whatever the deal is. And the other people, they're like, oh my God, you're not having dessert? You're not going to do that? You're saying no to dessert? Why would you do that? Oh, come on, just a little bite. What's that about? That's about that the other people sitting at the table or that other person is uncomfortable with the fact that they're eating something and maybe they feel guilty about it. So then they're kind of projecting it, is what it's called in psychological terms. They're projecting it onto you, wanting you to eat the same thing so that they can feel better about themselves. That's a big societal problem as I see it and what I see too, because that person is putting their needs above yours, and that's not acceptable. I know for myself where this comes into play is I don't like the taste of alcohol. I never have. I have the wonderful, benefit of never having had a hangover. I've certainly never had anybody recommend it to me simply because I can't stand the taste. And so for me, I'd rather consume my calories through something that isn't acquired that I love the taste of, like ice cream. So when it comes to that, people get really, really uncomfortable when I say no and I don't have something to drink, is what I found in social situations, because I don't mind if somebody else drinks. I don't have any problem with that. And usually I end up being the designated driver, which I think is a benefit, so everyone gets home safe. But when it comes right down to it, it's fascinating to see how uncomfortable people get even with the alcohol stuff, where they don't want, they don't want to feel alone like they're drinking. That's their issue. So it's really, really difficult when you stand up for yourself and you say no in those circumstances, because there's a lot of pressure on society for whatever it is. And we teach kids this all the time about society and pressure to do drugs or to smoke or whatever it is. Learning how to say no is a really, really important thing. And now the more difficult things about the word no. So this is the part of the video that may be upsetting for some viewers. So I wanted to caution you that no, when it comes to intimate or sexual activity, is a big, big, big issue. I know for myself, as a women's healthcare nurse practitioner working with a population that was mostly domestic violence and drug abuse and rape cases and all sorts of different things like that. I wasn't seeing happy people having babies. I was seeing very complex cases when I was doing that work. And the hard part with that is many, many people have experienced violence, whether it's physical, an abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. And many, many people in the population have experienced that. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, you can be in the same situation. The hardest part is we do a disservice to men and women on two fronts. One is that if you look at some of the old movies and things like that, it was the man's job, and this is, like I said, back in the old days, so we're not talking about, we're basically talking about heterosexual couples, but this applies across the board. That basically a man would pressure a woman's virtue and all of these stuff, and have to pressure a woman, and the only way she could feel okay about herself was if he pressured her because she didn't want sex, all these different things, right? And that, you can see it in themes in movies all the time, even sometimes to this day, where someone fights and they say no and they say no, and then it's actually a yes. And we teach people that no means yes in some very, very serious arenas, I'm afraid. And what we really need to be teaching people is respect for each other and respect for each other's boundaries. Because when it comes right down to it, no means no. And that's what I've told a lot of victims of rape that I've seen. It comes down to no really does mean no. I don't care if you're in the middle of the act, folks. If somebody says no, I don't care if it's the man, the woman, it doesn't matter. If somebody says no, it's not pushing another person any more than we should be pushing somebody to, eat this dessert or alcohol or whatever it is. No has to mean no. Because when everybody respects everybody's boundaries, what a great world that will be. Then you can take responsibility for your own behavior. If you want to have that dessert, have the dessert. If you want to have alcohol. But you don't have to be responsible for somebody else's wants and desires, especially in the sex realm. And that's a really tough one to cover, I know. And I think we need to be teaching people that it goes both ways. So not only does no need to be respected, but don't say no if you mean yes. And that includes in sexual activities. If you're saying no, that means no, not, oh, please pressure me to say yes. So it goes both ways with that we just need to straight up respect the no. But it's really, really important that you stand up for yourself, and no means no. And that's really difficult. And what I encourage you guys to do is, if anybody has had obviously experience, and I see so many people in my practice, it's unfortunately more the norm than not for people to have been through abuse or been through rape or been through all sorts of things, that the most important thing about it is to get some help, please. If you have trouble with boundaries, I don't care if it's regular psychological counseling, I don't care if it's what I do in emotional reprogramming or in hypnosis or whatever you need to do to help you care enough about yourself that no means no. It's important that we all respect each other and that we all respect each other's boundaries, and that we learn that when someone says no, to be accepting of that, because there's a reason for it, whether it's to protect their own personal boundaries and their comfort level, or whether it's in a realm of their own personal body and what they do with their body and what they're okay with and what they're not okay with. I certainly hope that this video, while portions of it I know may be a little bit upsetting, I certainly hope that this video helps us kind of just have compassion for one another and start society teaching people what the word no means, so that you can be in the know about respecting the no. Have a good one.